Okay, we're live.
Yep.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sally Ulrey, and I'm the Canon for Congregational Vitality and Ministry Development on the bishop's staff for the Diocese of Atlanta. I've been doing this congregational development work for about 5 years, and before that I worked in parishes in the Diocese of Atlanta in some kind of role like director of formation, something. I did formation. And with the main responsibility for youth ministry, which is my first love. So that's some of my experience, but I've been doing this work for about 5 years, and my understanding is that you watched a video of me at one point, so I'm just going to expound on that video a little bit. So you've heard some of the points in that video, and I'll just kind of walk you through. The main gist is that change is coming. The church is changing, the world's changing, but we have hope and we have tools. So I just want to expound and elaborate on that a little bit. The changes from a panoramic perspective, kind of an overview, we're seeing that a decline in church attendance. I think we all kind of feel that. That feels real. We're seeing this rise in part-time clergy. So we've got this traditional model where one parish has one full-time clergy person. That's been sort of our traditional model since the 50s. It's actually a blip on the radar of all of Christianity, but it feels like that's what we've been doing forever. So we've got this traditional model, and then we have this emerging model of this part-time bivocational clergy connection to these two parishes. This is not so much happening in the Diocese of Atlanta yet, but it looks like it will. We just have a longer runway to prepare for it. And then we've got all these cultural shifts. So the things that we used to be doing that helped people come into our churches and experience the gifts we have to offer, they're not really working as much anymore because the culture is changing. So we've got external change that's happening. As you know, the ASA is average Sunday attendance, and also the active baptized members. Both of those things are declining. It's been declining over decades, and the Diocese of Atlanta is not immune. It's declining at a similar rate as far as attendance, as you know, kind of across the church. So that's something that's happening. But before we jump to any conclusions, this is a graph that shows the number of births and the rate of births in our population over time. And this is a graph of our membership with the Episcopal Church. So they track. There's some things that are happening that our church, you know, it's because of the birth rate is part of the thing that's going on. And then this is a graph that shows the ASA by size, like by both membership and average Sunday attendance. The blue is the Episcopal Church. That's where most of the congregations are in these smaller sizes. Okay, but the purple is the Diocese of Atlanta. So most of our congregations are actually mid-size. So our experience here is different than like the rest of the Episcopal Church. So we've got a name that we have some abundance that's still happening in the Diocese of Atlanta. And the median church attendance is 35 people. So this Sunday morning across the Episcopal Church, like the median, half of the parishes have more than it, and half of it have less than this. 35 are gathering, right? In the Diocese of Atlanta, it's 75.5. So we're having a little bit of a different experience, but that just means not that it's not coming to us, because I think it still is coming to us. It means we have a longer time to prepare and to experiment and to figure out what this means. Like, how do we respond to these changes that are happening? We can't control the changes probably, but we can control how we respond. Put another way, this is, you can see for the Episcopal Church, most of the churches are small, whereas this is just a different graph of the same information. Most of our churches are mid-size.
How much of that is driven by Atlanta's market, like Atlanta being part of it and wanting urban center sort of informing the population?
Yeah, well, there's like lots of urban centers across the nation, but I think part of it actually is because we're in the South. The Southeast is a little more insulated from declining church attendance. So, yeah. So the other change that's happening inside the church is this clergy model. In 2010, there were like 26% of our clergy across the Episcopal Church reported that they had part-time clergy people, or that they were part-time. And then in 2022, that number was 54%. So that is also changing. In the Diocese of Atlanta, 43% of our clergy are that traditional model, one full-time priest for one parish. But then we've got a third of them that actually have more than one clergy person, almost a third, which is vastly different than the rest of the parishes in the Episcopal Church.
But by size, it might not be, right?
Sorry?
By size, it might not be different. We have more mid-sized congregations.
Yes, exactly. True.
So therefore, they can do that.
Yes.
Whereas, I mean, having moved around the country and been in mostly small parishes,
Yes.
they're lucky they got one.
Yes, exactly, yes. So for those of you online, the point was that we have bigger parishes that could afford to do that, basically. Yeah. So, and if other parishes across the country are smaller, then it makes sense they wouldn't have multiple clergy. But we do still have almost a third of our parishes that only have part-time clergy or long-term supply or something like that. Like they don't have necessarily a regular priest that is accessible to them. So we've got to figure out, I think, how we make sure, I don't know if you've seen the map of Georgia, but we've got all our little parishes are in these rural outskirts, and sometimes they're the only Episcopal presence in their whole county. And in places that other denominations have caused harm sometimes, these are lights and places of healing. And so we just don't want them to close, right? We've got to figure out how to resource them and how to work together. So it looks like the future of the church, and this is something the bishop, anytime he talks, you'll probably hear him talk about how do we share? How do we share the diocese is actually the smallest entity in the Episcopal Church is a diocese, not a parish, right? So how do we actually take responsibility for being the light in all of Middle and North Georgia? So the bishop loves to talk about that. But we got to think about this. The other changes that are happening are these cultural shifts. This is from a book by Charles Taylor called Secular Age. And he talks about how we were in the age of mobilization, or sometimes I've heard it called the age of association, where literally if you build it, they will come, because people wanted to be associated with institutions. They just wanted to belong to an institution. And now we're having this shift where what people really want is to belong to authentic communities, and they're sort of skeptical of institutions. Yeah. So that's maybe not the selling point that it was. And so what does that mean for the church is that, in the 50s, you just open the doors and people would come in. That's not true now. They want to belong to an authentic community. We've also got all this data and research on religions. There's a rising number of adults in America that are saying they don't belong to a religion, the nuns. And then there's also a rising number of people who say they're spiritual but not religious. They're not associated with a religious institution, but they feel like they want to have a connection with God. They want some authenticity. So the other thing is, this is a survey from 2018. Where do Americans find meaning? Because if you think about faith from a secular point of view, the secular definition of faith is making meaning, right? So where do they find a meaning? Mostly in relationships, particularly their family. Not really spirituality or religion. So here's the thing though, they're looking for meaning in relationships, and they're having trouble finding it. Because even before the pandemic, this is data from 2018, adults were saying they don't feel like they have these strong relational connections that really mean something. They're lonely. And so the Surgeon General in 2023 issued a warning that said, this is a problem to our national health and well-being, this epidemic of loneliness. And in that report, it specifically listed churches as places of connection, that we have a role in helping our national health in this area, which I thought was really fascinating and kind of wonderful, because we have what the world is most desperately needing and looking for. We have that to offer, which I think is great. So this is kind of what the future looks like. It looks like we're going to need to share resources. It looks like we're going to need to empower lay ministry in a lot of ways. It looks like more relational and less institutional. And so that, anytime there's change, there's loss, there's grief associated with that, but we still always have hope. And one of the things that, there's always silver lining. One of the things that I see in this change is a call back to that early church community that was so relational and, just kind of like a house church sort of movement, and people just wanted to be together. And I think that, that's kind of how it looks like we're being funneled, but maybe that's great. Maybe that's actually a beautiful thing that we have to offer the world, and we're just being called back to our original sort of intention that God had for the church, which is to be these relational, authentic communities. So I find hope in that. I also find hope that God is never going to abandon the church, right? It's not going to happen. The institution of the church might look different, I don't know. But the church will still be there for us to do things and to accomplish the mission. So we have that hope, and we also have tools, because here's the thing, when we talk about declining attendance, that doesn't necessarily mean declining vitality or declining viability. So vitality is the feeling, the experience of being part of a community, right? It's life-giving. Viability is can we keep the doors open? But declining attendance doesn't necessarily mean either one of those things. In fact, in the Diocese of Atlanta, our money is pretty steady overall, right? Even though, people are coming less often. And sometimes it's just that. It's just that they're coming less often. It's not that they're not coming at all. So I read somewhere, I have 2 little kids in elementary school, and read somewhere that the average Sunday attendance, the average attendance for families is 4 to 6 weeks. Once every 4 to 6 weeks, that's kind of what they can manage. And then I was with Bishop Eaton, who is in the Diocese of Southeast Florida, and he said something that has stuck with me the whole time. He said, we're not competing against soccer practice or any of those things. He's we're competing against rest. Rest. And he's we're not going to win. So we got to figure out how to, so in other words, just because people are coming less often doesn't mean they're gone, right? So we just might have to figure out a different way to be church for them, right? And for us. So how do we actually assess vitality? We have parochial report data that tells us about viability, but how do we assess vitality? These are some markers that we look for and that we have tools to help you develop and assess. So one is does a church have a clear sense of God's call, of their identity, who they are, the gifts they have to offer, and what their purpose is in the world in relationship to their neighbors? Is there a clear sense of identity and purpose? Are we having a transformative experience? Is what we do in the context of the church actually transforming our lives? Through worship, through education, it doesn't make a difference to us. Is there team leadership and mutual ministry? Are we doing this together? Or is just we can't, this happens a lot of times when there's one clergy or more than one clergy, that we kind of think, okay, well, you guys just do it. You know what I mean? Here you go. where we need to be a team. Do we have regular practices of discernment? And that means, like, are we listening in order to act? Are we assessing? Are we kind of putting our fingers on the pulse? Are we asking, like, what is God calling us to do? Do we have an action plan? And then do we evaluate that? Like, do we have some regular practices? In the corporate world, you might call this like strategic planning or goal setting, but I prefer to think of it as we're discerning. What is God calling us to do? And how do we assess that? And then do we have an identified ministry in the neighborhood? Like, is there some kind of external focus? It's not just about us. It's about giving our gifts away. So these are the things that I think help us assess vitality. And so another way is to look at this life cycle model. Because decline isn't necessarily about attendance. It's about the life cycle of an organization, just like the life cycle of an organism, a living organism. You have birth and formation, you reach stability, and then eventually you decline and you die. We can extend the life of organizations by going back to formation. Those formation questions, that's the discernment piece. It's who are we? Who are our neighbors? What are we supposed to be doing right now? What is God calling us to? So, y'all are 70 years old. Congratulations, that's amazing. And when you were started 70 years ago, the answers to these questions might have been different. And in fact, if we've never asked those questions again in 70 years, I will be worried. So we got to ask ourselves those questions again. The neighborhood changes. Who our neighbors are changes. Who we are changes. What our gifts are changes. So asking those questions helps us get back on the upward curve of the life cycle. This is another one that's more cycle-y. It's not as boxy, it's more round. But this one talks about how on the sort of upward toward vitality and stability, vision and relationships are the drivers. And on the downside, program and management, maintenance, is the drivers. So we kind of lose our vision and our relationships, and we just maintain. We lose our sense of mission. And so to get back around, it's those formation questions. What's our vision? What's our purpose? Who are our relationships we need to cultivate with our neighbors? And so exploring that is about discernment. It's about discerning vocation. And this is a quote that I love to pull out. It's from Frederick Buechner. He said, God's call, or your vocation, is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. So I immediately draw a Venn diagram. But the church's deep gladness, what is your clear identity and purpose? What are your values? What are the gifts you have to offer? What are your charisms? And then, on the other hand, who are my neighbors? Like, these are the questions that help us get back. Like, when we feel like we might be in decline, to ask those questions again. And just to say, again, that declining attendance does not necessarily mean decline. We have to assess that in other ways. So if that's the experience, which my guess is probably yes, because most churches I go to, there's some declining attendance happening. And so just to kind of like put that into some perspective, that there's like external changes that are happening that are attributing to this, but that doesn't mean the internal experience of church can't be vital and vibrant and amazing. It's just that the way we do church is probably going to look different. But we have time actually to figure it out, because our brothers and sisters and siblings across the nation are in a different place than we are, and it looks like it may go toward that way. So we have time to figure out some things and to experiment and try some things. So let's see. Oh gosh. That's my additional information after you watch the video. I know some of it was a repeat, but I think, do you have questions? Do you have comments? Do you have things you want to say? And then we're going to do the Lenten series, because we're going to do the series of Lent. Yes?
I have a kind of a strategic question, which may or may not be where you want to take the discussion.
Oh, yeah.
when I look at that graph, that family's number one, money and career number two,
Yeah.
and that's not really shocking, but somewhat distressing.
Yeah.
Is there a way, a strategy to leverage the sense of family attachment as a messaging to those people who value
Oh, yeah. Sure.
family one, the people that are into career and money, but we might leverage, hey, we've got family
Yes,
family
yes.
connection. Is there a way to
I do think
message
so.
that?
I think so. I think, like I said, we actually have what the world is longing for. So the messaging that's what we got to do. We don't want to be the best kept secret, right? We want people to know that this is something that we offer, that these relationships is authentic community, and make sure that that's actually true. Like when you offer that. But yeah, I think that's part of our job is like the message doesn't change, but the way we package it is important. And I think there's an opportunity there. I think you're totally right. Yeah.
Some here have heard me talk about this, but it's so pertinent that I'm going to take this opportunity. I'm a psychologist and I work with individuals. And for years, I have had clients that come to me. They're lonely, they want a sense of connection, they want a sense of family, they want to belong someplace. They have been turned off by the church
Yes.
for whatever reason.
Yes.
And I always feel like if there's a way, because we do have what they need, but we've got to offer it to them in a way that, like that slide where you had the authenticity and the,
Yeah.
we've got to offer it to them in a way that they want and are attracted to, and not feeling like they're going to get bashed over the head. Now, we don't bash people over the head here in
Yeah.
St. Bart's. I'm very clear about that. But I do think we need to do more to make it more fun for people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my thought.
I also think, honestly, that we have got to get better at personal invitation. You might call it evangelism if you were bold. But personal invitation, personal relationships of people that you already know, that you already have relationships with, and invite them to be part of something that, 84% of people in churches are there because of personal invitation. Yeah, so it actually does, it is kind of effective. Yeah. Yeah.
What's your observation on how long those cycles of discernment take and how often they should be implemented?
Well, yes, so this would be my recommendation. Let me take you back over here. Oh, here we go. So, at any point in the life cycle, there's ways to get back to formation, but it takes less energy when you're closer to formation to begin with. So if you're already in decline, this redevelopment process is going to take maybe years, but if you're sort of healthy stability, then it might be a yearly cycle to check in. Do you know what I mean? So depending on where you sort of feel like you are, and this applies to ministries as well, like not just the whole church, but even like particular ministries. You can do this ongoing sort of yearly check-in. I would do like a 3 to 5 year kind of more intense thing, and then if you're kind of down here, this might be a long process. It takes a lot of energy. So depending on where you're starting from, but I think probably just like a health checkup, you do that every year. It'd be good to do.
Okay, so that leads to the question of what are the tools for figuring out where you are? Okay, so to sort of ground that right here, we have lower attendance than we had 10 years ago.
Sure.
And in which all of these things have been happening.
Yes.
And so we have individual people who have different perspectives on where we are.
Yeah, sure.
So
that does happen.
we're not, right this minute, okay, I think our vestry probably has having just come off of a year on the vestry, has a pretty good handle on a lot of things, but what would you say might be a good step for the parish as a whole to, I guess my thinking is two things. One is to get a way to explain that's based not on individual emotions.
Yeah.
And then how do we begin communicating that? Because
Sure.
because what we might as a parish need to do depends on kind of where we are.
Yeah, exactly.
And where we are right now is a bunch of mishmash of perceptions.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so I already asked the question.
Some of the tools I think is most helpful because you could show this, you could explain each of these like areas where you can be, and then you could have people like put a dot on, like draw it on a piece of paper and be like, here's where I think I am, here's why, and just see what you think. I mean, that'd be one way to just get some sort of information and to see that there's a diversity of views on that, which is so true. The other thing is, like, we have tools that help assess and develop each of these 5 indicators. And one of them is called the CAT, the Congregational Assessment Tool, which I think is really helpful in exactly what you're talking about. Because you get all these different perspectives, but you kind of, you get the whole. You start to see the whole picture. And people use numbers to tell that story. Like they rate things with numbers so that you have a sense numerically, not just anecdotally, like what's happening. So I think that can be helpful. That's one of our assessment tools that we really like because it is insightful. It's data-driven insight, and it's not. It's because like what they found is that in coffee shops and doctors' offices, if you ask the coffee shop owners and the doctors and the people who work in the office, what are the patient's experience? What are your customers' experience? And then they survey the customers, they're like this. The doctors and the coffee shop owners, they understand their customers' experience. If you do that same thing for churches, they are not the same. Like if you ask the leaders of churches and then the people in the churches, like they're like night and day different. And the reason is because the relational fabric of the church, right? Because like you as a leader can only interact with, even if you interacted with everyone, you're not the only one interacting with everyone. Like there's all these other people interacting with each other, right? So it's really hard for leaders to put their fingers on the pulse. And one of the things I think the CAT does is it helps you figure out how not just leaders are interacting with people, but how they're interacting with each other and how that is impacting their experience. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is it's actually okay if people think they're in different spots. Because in some sense, for strategic planning, you do need to know kind of where you're starting from to map a path. But in another sense, like if you look at that life cycle, every time, like what helps you get to renewal is looking at those formation questions. So no matter where you're starting from, you're actually still going to do the same work. It just might take more energy depending on where you're starting from. So in some sense, it's good to get a sense of, like, help the system see itself, help them get a sense of where they are. But in another sense, the work is the same on one level, no matter where you're starting from. So it's a both and, actually. There's some work that will be different because you need to know where you're starting from, and then there's some work that's going to be similar no matter where you're starting from. So if people have different views on where you are, we can work with that.
Is there a you in every diocese in the Episcopal Church?
But there are like other dioceses that do have canons for congregational development. That's not a position that's in every diocese, but a lot of them are going that way. And a lot of the new bishops who are just being elected are being elected from positions of knowing about congregational development. Like, this is happening a lot, actually. what's on people's minds. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
I'm wondering if, well, not if, attendance is declining. Lay leadership becomes more important. Why is there not more consolidation of parishes?
Well, I think one reason is because we want the parishes to be the lights where they are. So if we were thinking about it from like a McDonald's franchising position, we would say, where is Georgia growing? And let's put the parishes there, right? Like so that they can be self-sustaining. But we're thinking about it from a mission standpoint. And so what we're thinking about is where's Episcopal presence most needed? Mm-hmm. And those are in some of the places that can't afford it. Like they just cannot sustain a parish by themselves. So I don't know that we want to close parishes necessarily. What I would like to see us experiment with, and this is just speaking for myself, I guess. I would like to experiment with like clergy who attend to multiple parishes in a region, that, you know, that there's teams, there's like a team effort or something, because what I don't want to happen is for these places that are the only Episcopal presence, and in places that are, you know, have other denominations have been maybe less than kind to some of our siblings. I don't want that to go away. Yeah. So I think the way to think about it is maybe how do we do this resource sharing so that people can get sacramental presence and sacramental leadership in these rural outposts, right? So I don't know if that answers your question. But
Well, I was thinking specifically in an urban setting, not rural setting.
Yeah.
It just
there's overlap already here.
Yeah, I come from Washington, D.C., and there were 3 Episcopal parishes within a mile and a half.
Yeah.
And 2 of the 3 struggle with huge building issues.
Yes.
Why isn't there more consolidation? In other words, we seem to derive a huge amount of our identity from our parish.
Yeah,
and I'm wondering how you de-emphasize our sense of community through parish and build it in other ways.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do know that the Diocese of, I think, Massachusetts has been doing a lot of experimentation with consolidating parishes. Mm-hmm. So we haven't had to like really worry about that as much because honestly, like where our parishes are sort of the most self-sustaining is in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. You know, that's where like all the big parishes are and they have all the resources they need to sustain themselves. But I know in Massachusetts that's been something we at some point we may need to learn what they have learned, mm-hmm. But not yet.
If you think of that rectangle life cycle, where would you say the Diocese of Atlanta is on that, and versus where the capital T, capital E, capital C Episcopal Church is?
Okay, if I just had a venture guess,
yeah.
Based on what I knew, and I'm one person, so it's probably not, you know, take it with a grain of salt. But I would say like that stagnant stability, like what we're seeing is other people are already sort of in decline. They're already like forced to redevelop, you know, or to die, like to go on to disintegrate. They're already in these places where they have to combine parishes or consolidate or close or figure out new ways to do things. Like we're not having to do that yet. We're not being forced to do that yet. We have some stability there. But what I would say is, I don't want us to not do anything and just like wait. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, oh, it's not affecting us really,
Right.
but because it will. We just have more of a runway before that starts hitting us, I guess, more. That's what I think.
For the diocese or for the Episcopal Church?
Like, I think maybe it's really hard to say overall for the Episcopal Church. And I think there's like some indicators of decline overall, and probably for us a little bit too, but I think we have more of there's a lot of indicators to me of stability still, but if we don't do anything, then we're gonna go on the other side, you know what I mean? But Yeah.
It may be too early for this, but I've some churches where the attendance has resumed, has improved.
Yes.
And if so, how are they defining why that's happening?
Yeah, so I actually did a study on this because I looked at all of our parochial report data and I looked at the parishes that were doing better than the average in our diocese. And some of the things that I found out so this is actually based on our research and other research. These were the things that they did. So I interviewed every single one that was like either better than their pre-pandemic ASA or they were better than our average. So they were on the upper end of this. And these were the things that they told me, were some version of this. And so based on that, we were like, okay, we're gonna work on these things then. We're gonna assess them for all our parishes. We're gonna have tools for them. We're gonna help these things develop. But there's more than just research from our diocese that points to these things as well. So it kind of gels with what's already out there and been researched.
How many individual parishes within our diocese are directly supported by the diocese in some piece?
Not very many. Like Holy Comforter is a ministry of the diocese that, like, part of your Canon 20 assessment goes to do that ministry. There are a couple of our Hispanic congregations that are supported a little bit by the diocese. But like we don't have anymore like the mission or you know how they used to have mission or parish status? We don't really have that. So like we have 89 parishes and they're all pretty much self-sustaining. Yeah. Or I mean, other than Holy Comforter, Church of the Common Ground is another one that gets supported. But not very many. Should know that number, but it's small.
Okay.
But there are parishes that don't have priests, right? Like they're sustaining their building and stuff, but they don't actually have regular sacramental leadership.
That's your 1/3 wedge
Yeah.
of folks who have
Yeah.
rotating clergy.
Yeah. So, and some of them, like their clergy might come once a month.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Which is not the end of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, we know how to do things like that.
Sure.
You know, there are programs I mean, you know, we do have morning prayer.
Yeah,
Prayer.
that's right.
Sun Coupling, which is not a clergy-led service.
That's true.
We have, I've been in places, West Virginia, where there were folks, lay people trained and authorized to offer the reserved sacrament and do,
Yes.
you know, and there are ways to
We
do
haven't done that in our
this.
diocese.
So, yeah, that could be fine.
But isn't that the origin of EFM?
Yeah.
To train lay people to
We also
serve
have
and...
our licensed lay ministers that we're starting to license and train and stuff. The only thing I would say about that is that, like, as I mentioned, sort of having one full-time clergy person and weekly Eucharist is kind of like, has happened since the 50s. And before that, I mean, you might have memories of like not having Eucharist every Sunday. But what happened in the pandemic, I think, was really revealing, is that actually is not like generally okay for us not to have Eucharist. You know what I mean? Like I think that either we are naming something, a change that's already there, like has happened, or naming something that's already there, is that we are Eucharistic people. And so figuring out how to get sacraments to people actually is, I mean, like we have stopgap measures that might be morning prayer and things like that, but we still have got to figure out how to do the sacraments, which that, you know, laying sacramentals from the reserved sacrament could be a possibility.
Well, I did a reserved sacrament service in the Panhandle of Florida last week, and it feels completely inauthentic. And I wouldn't say unholy, it certainly was earnest, but it was not the complete experience.
Yeah, yeah. I think Angela.
Yeah,
just want to say, would you agree that given the graph that you show that shows a steady decline over decades?
Yeah.
This is not new.
No, it's not.
There have been several different pockets throughout the Episcopal Church where they tried this yoke ministry.
Yeah.
There was the Canon 9 priests that were
Yes,
there at one
that's
time,
right.
and they were looked down upon by clergy who went to seminary. So these things are not new.
Yeah.
I think what is new is people are awakening to the reality, but the
Yeah.
trend clearly has been there for decades, but people, I
Decades.
think, perhaps didn't realize the reality until the pandemic struck. And then you have to back up and then come back again and reassess.
That's so true. I mean, the culture, the shifts, the changes that are happening, like, that's why I'm saying we're probably not going to stop the changes. We're probably just going to have to figure out how to respond and be church in a different way. Because, like, it still continues to happen that way. So maybe part of our energy goes into experimenting with new ways to be church and new ways to be community.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Are there other religions or other organizations that you are finding have that like lay-led or community-led things that you wish that we would have? Like where are the places you look for inspiration on how we do this differently?
Actually, like our siblings in the 2/3 world, they already do this in the Anglican world. Like we had some of our, friends in Ghana that were like, yeah, I have 10 parishes. Like they're already having it, and they're growing. They're growing. So, there are some ways that experiments like that have been happening where it's not the traditional, what we would say the traditional model of one priest for one parish. There's ways to make that work that are actually effective. So that, I'm actually really interested in, like, maybe one day I'll get to go on a pilgrimage and, like, see how they do stuff, but that would be really fun. So, yeah. But I will say, in the Western, like, culture in the United States, mainline denominations, evangelical denominations have now started declining. Like, this is what's happening.
Do you look at any places outside the church?
Oh, yeah. No, I like that question.
At what? I didn't hear.
At places outside the church for just inspiration?
Yeah, for like community building and things like that.
Well, one thing I've noticed, my husband is a member of a Catholic church, which I've attended with him. And over the last 10 years, it has become increasingly Hispanic.
Yes.
And the congregation that was there has kind of aged out, it seems like. But we went like to the Stations of the Cross. My husband is funny anyway, but after we had ours and the Hispanics had theirs, he said they've got the whole orchestra out there,
Wow.
And it's like this, it's like a community space for them. I mean, I've thought about that a lot. It's where they share food there. I think it's a place for them to do that, and there's different aspects of that. But I think it's that feeling of
it's familiar. The places in our diocese with the most growth are in our Hispanic communities. It has been like that for a number of years, like probably the last 4 or 5 years. So, yeah.
I know we're almost out of time, but I'd like to give a plug for a book that I would encourage everyone to read. Phyllis Tickle's The Great Emergence.
Yeah.
The Great Emergence, Phyllis Tickle does this whole cycle over, she's determined like every 500 years or so, the church has gone through these changes.
Yes.
It's not a new book.
No.
Once I read it, because at first I was thinking, oh no, what's happening? But once I read her book and I also listened to it, I thought, no, we don't need to worry.
No.
This is a natural life cycle
That's
that
right.
has happened through
That's right.
Christendom, through the
That's right.
years.
And
So,
it looks
Phyllis
like that's what's
Tickle,
happening.
The Great Emergence.
Yeah.
To kind of, glob onto what
When you were talking about, you guys have been here 7 years, that's awesome.
every time I hear something like that, I remember the church we went to in France.
Oh, yeah.
And we happened to be, there on our tour on a day that they had a banner hanging on the church out front, in purple and white, and it was like something about millionaire. And I realized they were celebrating their 1,000 year
Yes.
anniversary
Yes.
in that place.
Yes.
I said, in that building.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that when I'm looking at these cycles,
Yeah.
thinking, oh, wow, if we could just, it would be fascinating to look at the history of every place.
Right.
Or any of these really old places.
Yeah.
Or going to London and seeing the bishops that go back, 200 a year,
Yeah.
400 or something.
Yeah.
Like you say, the church goes through these things.
Yes.
And we just need to take a breath.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean it's easy to go through.
No.
Right. But yeah, but there's like so much hope in that, right? Yeah.
So I have just 3 random comments that have bits, ideas to start. One is the portion of the U.S. population that is growing the fastest is the Hispanic population.
Yeah.
So if you go back to your chart about birth rate
Yeah.
and presence, the browning of America is an important recognition, and so that's where the population is right now. So I think that's important to bear in mind. I also remember as a child, so I lived in a household of a clergy person who was like here, and here.
Yeah.
A church in Simpsonville, South Carolina, another one in Greenville, and then Furman. It's like, so we lived that everywhere. It's doable, but I remember, the potluck lunch on the lawn, we do breakfast here, which is a huge community building piece, and it's clearly very important to us. But the sharing of food, both sacramentally and community,
Right.
as a huge thing. And just to the point about the age of churches, when my dad was in one of the summers he was in seminary, was placed at a church in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and they were in their new building,
Yeah.
the one they built in 1690 after the other one burned down.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Well, I want to thank Sally so much. I'm sorry we have to cut this short. I think we'd be here another hour.
I know.